Welcome to Every Church a Peace Church, a program that promotes the belief that the church could turn the world towards peace if the church lived and taught as Jesus lived and taught. My name is Don Edwards. I'm the host and producer of this program, and I'd like to welcome you back. If you are a regular follower of this program, you know that what we try to do is to provide you with informative and knowledgeable guests who talk about the issues facing today's faith, the issues of peace in a culture of violence, and the role of nonviolence and the role of justice in particularly in the Christian community and in the world. So we have a wonderful and informative guest that I'm so proud to bring with you today. Her name is Ruby Sales. Ruby is the founder of Sprit House in Washington, D.C. She's a wonderful spirit. I know that you will enjoy what she has to say. She has a wonderful history of nonviolence, of social activism and justice. Let me just read to you a little bit about what the mission statement is that I pulled from the website on Sprit House. It says, in building a just and nonviolent world, Sprit House tackles systematic issues of injustice and violence, such as classism, racism, militarism, economic injustice, and religious and cultural domination. Additionally, Sprit House assists communities in drawing on their spiritual, social, and economic resources to build liberating communities and relationships. Now, Ruby, I'm so glad to have you with us on Every Church a Peace Church. I've been trying to get you here for the longest.
That's right.
And I'm so glad that we were able to hook up our schedules to have you here.
I'm so glad to be here, and thank you very much, and I'm happy that it's finally happening.
Well, yes, I'm so Spirit led it, and here we are, and I appreciate you having the time to spend with us and sharing with us, because you have a wonderful spirit, a wonderful story to tell. I know your background is so varied. It includes a ministry of an Episcopal, you're an ordained Episcopal minister, you're a social activist, you have a lot to say about the Southern Black Freedom Movement and its role in promoting nonviolence as a means of acquiring justice and equality and love in our community. Tell our viewers a little about how you took this journey. What started you on this journey of nonviolence?
Well, I think as I think about my journey, it really began in the Southern Black Church, First African Baptist Church, and the theology that surrounded me, a theology of love, that even in the face of the violence and terrorism of segregation, there was a theology that was very much a part of the Black community, and it was a theology predicated on love. It was a theology predicated on treating everybody right. It was a theology that said that I might not control the world, but I control my internal life, and I'm not going to have anybody reduce me to hating anyone. And so that I grew up hearing that conversation. And then when I went to Tuskegee Institute, and suddenly found myself face to face with the Southern Freedom Movement, commonly known as the Civil Rights Movement, I found myself coming in contact with a really further developed, articulated version of nonviolence. And I joined the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and of course, nonviolence undergirded, the philosophy of nonviolence undergirded, and building a new society, a beloved community, undergirded the work that we did as SNCC members in Lowndes County, Alabama. Mm-hmm. So that was at 16, yes.
In the 60s.
Yes.
And you grew up raised in Alabama?
Grew up and raised in Columbus, Georgia, actually.
Okay, all right. And then
I went to Tuskegee in the 1960s, early 1960s, and joined SNCC in the early 1960s 'as a Tuskegee student.
Well, that must have been an interesting time to to be in Lowndes County, Alabama, seeking to register voters who have never voted.
Well, speak of violence. Lowndes County was one of the most violent counties in the South, Black Belt counties in the South. It had a reputation and a name as being Bloody Lowndes. And you could go over to a gully in Lowndes County and you could look into the gully and you could see the bleached bones of black men and women probably who had been lynched or murdered in Lowndes County. So the violence in Lowndes County was very virulent, very aggressive. And when SNCC went into Lowndes County, it recognized that it was coming up against one of the most violent systems of segregation in the South.
Mm-hmm. You had, I know part of your story involves Jonathan Daniels, and you might want to share that since we're talking about how one confronts violence with love and understanding.
Well, Jonathan was a seminarian student from the Episcopal Divinity School who had heard the call to come to Selma during evening song in chapel. And so he made a decision after the Elmer Pettus Bridge that he would go down to Selma in response to Dr. King's call to Christians and to church people to come south. And while working in Selma, he became affiliated and very close with the work of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And during that time, we became friends, Jonathan and I. And we were part of a local movement organized by young people in Fort Deposit, a demonstration against the local store who charged their parents exorbitant amounts of money and constantly kept their family in debt. And no matter how much they worked on the land, they never cleared enough money to be debt-free. And so the young people were very upset about this. And so they organized a demonstration to protest this unequal and exploitive system. And Jonathan and I were a part of that demonstration along with people like Stokely Carmichael and local people, local young people from Lowndes County. And it was really an incredible show of white force and violence the day of the demonstration, because you had a mob of white men crying for our blood with baseball bats, garbage cans, anything that they could hold in their hands. And let me tell you, that was not a good place to be that day.
At Fort Deposit?
At Fort Deposit.
Alabama?
Alabama, which was about 10 miles from the county seat of Lowndes County, Alabama. And after we were arrested and thrown in a garbage can, taken to the county seat at Hayneville.
Thrown in a garbage can?
In a garbage truck.
Okay.
A garbage truck. It felt like a garbage can. And taken to the county seat at Haynesville. We were arrested, booked, and held in jail for a week without adequate food or water. And on the final day of that week, on the 7th day of our incarceration, the sheriff suddenly decided that we could be let free on our own word, that he was trusting us to be let free. And of course, that struck some people like myself as very contradictory and paradoxical, because if you think I'm an animal, you wouldn't think that I would have a word. So we were a bit suspicious, but he, said that if we didn't leave, there would be severe consequences. So basically, we were pushed out of jail. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those hot Southern days, where if you've grown up in the South, you know those days, or lived in the South, where the pavement literally emits vapors. Mm-hmm. And we had been in jail for a week, and of course we were thirsty and hungry and tired. So the group designated Father Richard Morrisroe, a priest who had come down from Illinois, Joyce Bailey, a local youth activist, myself, Jonathan Daniels, who had come down from EDS, and myself.
Jonathan is a white seminarian?
A white seminarian, yes, and myself. And Father Morrisroe was a white seminarian. And we decided that we would go to this, what we thought was a friendly store that we had gone to hundreds of times. And so when we got just approaching the door of the store on the step, Tom Coleman, this man whom we later discovered was Tom Coleman, came out waving a shotgun in my face because I was in the front, and he said, "The B word, I'll blow your brains out." And in a split second, as he said, B.I., I'll blow your brains out, there was a tug on, I was wearing a flowing blouse, there was a tug on the blouse where Jonathan was pulling me back. I fell down, and the next sound I heard was the explosion of a shotgun and Jonathan's body ricocheting to the sky, about 20 feet. And the next thing, and so Father Morris Rowe, Richard, held on to Joyce Bailey's hands, and they began to run, run, run. And then there was a shot fired, and Father Morris Rowe fell to the ground. And I lay there on that ground, thinking that I was dead. And into my consciousness came the voice of Joyce Bailey, who was no more than 17 years old, calling me because she had run to the side of the store. You know, in the South, you always have these abandoned cars in a lot. So she had run over to that lot and called my name, and I found some awareness, and I got up on my knees and I ran over to her. And we heard Father Marshall on the ground crying for water, and we tried to go and attend to them with someone else, with some other people from the group. And Tom Coleman was waving the shotgun like a crazy person. So basically, Jonathan saved my life that day. Father Morris Rowe was murdered, assassinated, and Father Morris Rowe was deeply wounded, physically wounded. And both Richard and John, Richard was taken to the hospital in a hearse on top of Jonathan's dead body. So this was the level of violence, the kind of violence that reduces people, that dehumanize human beings, not only dehumanizes the person, Jonathan and Father Morris Rowe, but even dehumanized the doctors, because they didn't want to operate on Richard Morris Rowe, on a priest. And finally, from the least likely place, this general rose up and said, "I'll operate on him." So it was really a general who saved Richard's life.
Mm-hmm. Well, ordinarily, being confronted with that type of violence, one could often expect a violent reaction. What was your reaction to being confronted with that type of violence?
Well, first of all, I think when you're confronted with that kind of violence, there is a kind of numbness and a disbelief in the capacity of one human being to be filled with that kind of hate. Although intellectually you know that the system is fueled by hatred, coming face to face with another human being and seeing that manifested in such an irrational and an explosive way, one has to almost gather one's senses to take it in. And then having done that, I think, there's a kind of numbing. And then there is an anger, but the anger is not to be confused with hatred. The anger is that you've lost someone who was very precious, a friend and a comrade. And so you have the normal kind of anger at injustice. Mm-hmm. But never did it for a moment occur to any one of us who were survivors in that situation that we should hate Tom Coleman. I don't think I hated him a day of my life. The word was not even, it just was not a part. Mm-hmm. I thought he was unjust. I thought he was a terrorist. I thought he deserved to be put in jail and they needed to throw away the key. I thought that there needed to be some retribution for the great harm, reparations for the great harm that he had done me that he had done Jonathan's mother, killing her only son, a young man with great promise. But so that one wrestles with all, and I thought that the government needed to be more aggressive to make sure that justice was going to be done in that situation. But I was too deeply grounded. And I was too deeply grounded in nonviolence and just with parents like my parents, where hate was not a part of the world we lived in. So it just never occurred to me or my comrades. I've never heard anyone talk about hating Tom Coleman. But it was very interesting. Tom Coleman, until the day he died, hated us. Because he said that if he had to do it again, if he had to do it over, he'd do it again.
That's sad.
That's sad.
That's sad. Tell me, that obviously has had an impact in terms of your journey towards nonviolence, the roots of your family, the roots of your church. Generally speaking, now in this culture of nationalistic violence, are we finding the same type of grounding that allows us to reflect the spirit of the Christian spirit of peace and love in the face of violence that you had when you grew up? Are we seeing that translated and continuing to develop to the present day?
Oh, yes. I think in pockets and places throughout this country, people are manifesting that in their work. Every church, a peace church, makes the point that every church should adhere to Jesus' call to peacemaking. You have that in various denominations. You have peace and justice groups around the country who are talking about the importance of nonviolence. Not only the importance, but the centrality of nonviolence to Christianity. So I think that throughout the history in this country, there have been two tendencies, two conversations. One conversation has been a call to violence, and then on a much smaller level, there's been a call to nonviolence. Whether you were talking about during the America, quote unquote, frontier years, and it's terrorism and violence against Native American people. On the one hand, you have the government, the empire, and its supporters justifying that. And on the other hand, you had people resisting that. So throughout this country, thank God, we've had an alternative legacy to draw on rather than the legacy of violence that is an intricate part of this American story.
Indeed, there has been a two-story or two paths to the Christian theology, the path that's where Christianity has been used to support slavery, and the path that Christianity has been used to abolish slavery. Same with war. Same with the economic oppression of people. But it seems that it remains a struggle for the gospel to work its work in terms of the world, in terms of our politics, when it shouldn't be. One would think that the power of the gospel, the power of the word that Jesus spoke on the mountain, Sermon on the Mount, the basic principles that undergird Christianity, that being a common love of each other as part of the beloved family, the human family, of forgiveness, of sharing. Why is that not translated in terms of our political selves, the political actions of our country more?
Well, I think for several reasons. I think we've got several competing forces here. I think churches as institutions have oftentimes aligned themselves with the militarism of the state, have talked about have justified war, has used scripture to justify imperialistic aggression against other countries. And so the church, in some real ways, have been partners with militarism. And that has really, really played, I mean, if your preacher is standing up in the pulpit telling you that to fight has been ordained by God and is your duty and responsibility, that really subverts the message. So the church has been one of the greatest subverters, the Christian church, of the Christian message of peacemaking and justice. And I think the other thing, particularly in the world that we live today, it's very hard to compete against the loud war drums, the loud beating of violence in the society, the pervasiveness of violence everywhere you look in the society. It's very hard to have a response and a resistance that can be as visible and as heard as that. So I think we've got some real strong competing forces. And the other thing I think is that people never make a connection between the good news and the critical ways in which they live in the world. They never really think about what does it mean when it says that Jesus was a Prince of Peace. They never think about this whole notion of plenty of good room, that the kingdom of God is very different from the kingdom of the empire, and that what Christians are called upon is to build up the kingdom. And so oftentimes we get our work confused and our roles confused as Christians, and we believe that the empire and not God is our benefactor. We believe that the empire is the source of the benefits in everything that we have in society, and so that we give all of our loyalty over. And so whatever the empire calls upon us to do, even if it's in conflict with God's invitation, because we are so spiritually and psychologically indebted to the empire, because one of the great, great sins of the empire is that it wants to be God. It wants people to bow down and adore. They really lust after God's power, and they want to be the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. They want to be the instigator and the terminator of human existence. And so people get very confused by that.
So they kind of wrap themselves up with some of the accoutrements of religion and God, and interfuse them so that you have a militaristic message that has a gloss talking about people of faith.
Absolutely. And people of faith, although we say we're of faith, we do not clearly understand the difference between the kingdom of God and the empire, the kingdom of the empire, the kingdom of the king, the kingdom of the state. So we spend a great deal of our lives adhering to that rhetoric, placing patriotism over peacemaking and justice-making, placing a loyalty to the state greater than a loyalty to God and to each other. That we're really called upon as Christians to be loyal to this vision of the welcome table, where everybody has a seat around the table, where we are inextricably bound to each other, and where we are all bound to each other by our common connections to God. And so we do not adhere to that message.
One of our prior guests, Cornel West, talked about the prophetic Christianity and the Justinian Christianity, and that tension, and you've expressed it in a different way. In terms of the African American church, which was the core that supported nonviolence in the face of violence, what is the role of the African American church presently in this conflict between the path of Jesus as I read them, and the path of Jesus as perhaps some of the militaristic politicians that use the cover of Jesus in support of their imperialistic ways? Where does the black church fit in on this?
Well, first of all, let me just say that during the Southern Freedom Movement, the black church played a critical role in calling the nation to a beloved community, and for us to use our resources and our goods, as Paul would say, to build up the world rather than tear it down. And the black church was a very critical voice in articulating that message. And our power came not from our ability as principalities to take over the world, but we saw our power as redemptive power, the power to create, to be co-creators with God in building up a new society. Today, that power is that new society is not the beloved community, but that new society is a world dominated by U.S. imperialism. And unfortunately, the black church has far too often aligned itself with that message and has not asked the question, the very fundamental question, of what does it mean to gain the world and lose our souls? Mm-hmm. All around the world during the Southern Freedom Movement, we stood as a model, an example, and a moral voice of justice and freedom. You lose that moral authority. You lose the right to critique racism. You lose the right to critique violence. You lose the right, the authority to critique these isms when you become foot soldiers for the murderous empire. And it's not enough to say that people need jobs. I submit to you that the Creator, the Almighty Creator, is so great and so just that if we would work together as a community, we could create jobs that are not tied into blood making and killing. That's the cry of a lazy community. A community who does not want to use its gifts and resources to create different kinds of opportunities for its children.
Well, Ruby, I know that this is, I know we only have a minute or so left, but this is the voice that we continue to want to hear in this program. The voice where our God is a just God, that we don't need to depend upon the booty of war and of domination in order to be successful as a society, as a country, that if we can enjoy the benefits of God's justness through compassion and love and forgiveness, then we would all be in better shape. And that's the voice that you have been giving through many years, and I want to thank you and appreciate it. Thank you, Ruby, for being with us. Time flies when we're having fun. And maybe sometime you can come back real soon and visit with us and with our viewers. I want to thank you all for being a part of Every Church a Peace Church. I want you to seek peace, find peace, and most of all, be peace. Thank you.
Our back on us. How long